My name is David. I've been working at a remote ranch. Its name isn't important for several years now. The job is tough but honest, and most mornings I'm up before dawn, saddling my horse and heading out to check on the herd. We manage about 500 cattle spread across a vast stretch of scrubland and mesquite. It's beautiful country, but it can be harsh, the kind of place where you always keep one eye on the horizon, watching for dust devils or summer storms brewing. The first strange incident happened in late April, just as the bluebonnets were fading and the real heat of summer was beginning to creep in. I was out near the eastern fence line, repairing a section that had come loose after a recent windstorm. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and purples. As I worked, an uneasy feeling washed over me. It sounds cliché, but I felt like I was being watched. I started glancing around, half expecting to see a coyote or maybe a mountain lion lurking in the brush. But there was nothing, just the distant lowing of cattle and the rustling of the wind through the mesquite. I tried to shake it off and went back to work. But as it got later, that feeling only intensified. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could have sworn I heard something moving in the tall grass just beyond the fence line, something big. I called out, thinking it might be one of the other hands playing a prank on me. "Who's out there?" I yelled, my voice betraying how freaked out I was. There was no answer, just more rustling, closer now. Then a smell hit me, like nothing I'd ever encountered before. A mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else I couldn't quite place, something alien. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I grabbed my tools and hightailed it back to my truck, my heart pounding. As I drove back to the bunkhouse, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. When I got back, I didn't mention it to the other hands. They already thought I was a bit soft, being from the city originally, so I didn't need to give them more ammunition. But that night, as I lay in my bunk, listening to the chorus of snores around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there had been sizing me up. The next few weeks passed without incident. The spring roundup kept us all busy from sunup to sundown, and I managed to push that strange encounter to the back of my mind. But in early June, things started getting weird again. It was Carlos who first noticed something was off with the herd. Carlos had been working cattle longer than I'd been alive, and he had an almost supernatural sense for when something wasn't right. One morning at breakfast, he mentioned that the cattle seemed spooked, more skittish than usual. "They know something we don't," he said, his weathered face lined with concern. "Animals can sense things." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but over the next few days, I started noticing it too. The cattle were clustering together more tightly than usual, even in the heat of the day, and they were quieter, like they were trying not to draw attention to themselves. Then the attacks started. At first, it was just a calf here and there. We'd find them in the morning, weak and listless, with strange puncture wounds on their necks. The boss, let's call him Mr. Wilson, figured it was coyotes or maybe a mountain lion. He had us start patrolling at night, taking shifts to ride the fence lines with rifles at the ready. Then things got really strange. I was on patrol with Ethan, another hand, about a week after the attack started. We were riding along the southern pasture. The moon was low in the sky, and it was eerily quiet, too quiet. Our horses were on edge too, their ears flicking back and forth nervously. Suddenly, Ethan's horse reared up, nearly throwing him off. As he struggled to calm the animal, I saw something move in the shadows about 50 yards away. It was big, bigger than a dog, but the shape was all wrong. It seemed to be hairless, with a long snout and powerful hind legs. Before I could get a better look, it was gone, melting into the dark like a nightmare fading at dawn. Ethan hadn't seen it. He was too busy trying to control his horse. When I described what I'd seen, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You've been listening to too many of Carlos's stories," he said with a nervous laugh, but I could tell he was spooked too. The next morning, we found 3 more calves attacked. This time, the wounds were worse, like something had been trying to drain them dry. Mr. Wilson called the local game warden, but they were as baffled as we were. That's when the whispers started. At first, it was just Carlos muttering about El Chupacabra when he thought no one was listening. But soon, The other hands were talking too. Most of them were too macho to admit they believed in things like that, but you could see the fear in their eyes. I didn't want to believe it. Chupacabras were just stories, right? Something made up to scare kids and sell tabloids. But with each passing day, as more animals were attacked and strange things kept happening around the ranch, it got harder to deny that something unnatural was going on. One night, about 2 weeks into the attacks, I was awakened by a commotion outside the bunkhouse. I grabbed my boots and ran out along with the other hands. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. The entire herd, hundreds of cattle, were pressed up against the corral fences, as far from the open pastures as they could get. They were bellowing in terror, their eyes rolling wildly. And there, at the edge of our floodlights, was a shape. It was hard to make out details, but what I could see chilled me to the bone. It was the same thing I'd seen before, the thing that I thought looked dog-like, but with a clearer view, it was roughly humanoid, hunched over like some kind of primitive ape. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, and its eyes reflected the light like a cat's. For a moment, it just stood there, watching us. Then it let out a shriek, a sound like a cross between a mountain lion and a woman screaming, and vanished into the night. After that, things escalated quickly. We lost more cattle every night, despite our best efforts to keep them safe. Mr. Wilson brought in experts, veterinarians, wildlife biologists, even a couple of paranormal investigators, but no one could explain what was happening. The atmosphere at the ranch became tense, bordering on panic. Some of the hands quit, unwilling to deal with whatever was out there. Those of us who stayed began carrying loaded weapons at all times, even during the day. We set up trail cameras all over the property, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature, but nothing solid ever came to light. Eventually, Mr. Wilson decided to sell the ranch. This was grave news to most of us, and rumors immediately began to circulate. I remember thinking, surely it's because of this alleged chupacabra, but it was a possibility. The night before the new owners were set to arrive, I had the closest encounter yet. I was doing a final patrol of the property, more out of habit than any real hope of stopping the attacks. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds that night, and it was very dark. I was definitely on edge. As I rode past the old barn, I heard a sound that made my horse stop in its tracks, a low guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My hand went to my rifle, but before I could even think about raising it, something jumped from the shadows. I caught a glimpse of gray-green skin, glowing red eyes, and wickedly curved claws before my horse reared up and threw me to the ground. I hit hard, the air driven from my lungs. I gasped and heard something circling me, its heavy, ragged breathing filling the night air. I thought I was about to meet a cold and dark end, but just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone, bounding away into the night, its footsteps fading into the distance until I could no longer hear them. I don't remember how I made it back to the bunkhouse that night, but I know that I did. The following morning, the new owners arrived, and I handed in my resignation. With the change in ownership and the increasingly dangerous events, I didn't feel comfortable staying. I moved on to work construction in Houston, but I still get creeped out thinking back to those glowing red eyes and the feeling of being circled by something predatory in the dark. The Midnight Stalker. The night was cold, the sky an inky black with only a sliver of moonlight breaking through the thick blanket of clouds. Jenna tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she guided the car down the deserted highway. Beside her, Lauren was flipping through the radio stations, trying to find something other than static or country music. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only constant sound in the otherwise eerie silence. "How much longer until we hit the next town?" Jenna asked, glancing at the dashboard clock. It read 11:45 p.m. Lauren squinted at the GPS on her phone. "Looks like another hour, maybe more. Why, are you getting tired?" Jenna nodded, stifling a yawn. "Yeah, a little. I could use some coffee or something. This highway is making me sleepy." "Same here," Lauren replied. "Let's keep an eye out for a diner or gas station." As if on cue, a weathered sign appeared on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. "Rest stop, diner and gas, 5 miles ahead." "Perfect," Lauren said, perking up. "We'll stop there." The rest of the drive was uneventful. the highway stretching endlessly before them with no other cars in sight. The road seemed to disappear into the dark horizon, and the only illumination came from their headlights, slicing through the night. Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that they were the only people left in the world, trapped in an endless drive with no destination. Finally, the dim glow of the rest stop's neon sign came into view. It flickered weakly, as if struggling to stay lit. The diner was a squat, old-fashioned building with large windows, though the inside was obscured by the darkness. The gas station sat adjacent to it, a single pump standing lonely and unused. "Doesn't exactly look like the Ritz," Jenna muttered as she pulled into the parking lot. "Yeah, but beggars can't be choosers," Lauren said with a shrug, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Let's just grab something quick and get back on the road." They both stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at their skin. Jenna pulled her jacket tighter around her, her breath visible in the frigid air. The place was eerily quiet, with no signs of life inside the diner. The windows were dark, and the only sound was the distant hum of a flickering streetlight. "Are they even open?" Lauren asked, peering through the window. "There's a light on in the back," Jenna pointed out, nodding toward a faint glow visible deeper inside the diner. "Let's check it out." They pushed open the door, a bell above it jingling softly. The interior was just as old and run down as the exterior suggested. The linoleum floor was cracked and yellowed with age, and the booths were upholstered in faded red vinyl. The smell of stale grease and old coffee hung in the air, and the counter was cluttered with half-empty ketchup bottles and dusty napkin dispensers. "Hello?" Jenna called out, her voice echoing through the empty diner. There was no response. The place seemed abandoned, yet the door had been unlocked, and there was that faint light in the back. Lauren looked uneasy, but she forced a smile. "Maybe the cook's in the back," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. They both walked deeper into the diner, passing the counter and heading toward the kitchen. As they approached, the light they had seen earlier flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Jenna fumbled for her phone and turned on the flashlight. "This place is seriously creeping me out," Lauren whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Yeah, me too," Jenna admitted. "Let's just grab some snacks from the car and get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." But as they turned to leave, they heard it, a soft shuffling sound, like something being dragged across the floor. They both froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Did you hear that?" Lauren whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jenna replied, her heart pounding. "Let's go." They hurried back toward the entrance, but before they could reach the door, it swung open with a loud creak. Standing there was a man, his figure silhouetted against the dim light outside. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a face obscured by the shadow of a baseball cap. He stepped inside, blocking their way out. "Can I help you, ladies?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "We were just leaving," Jenna said quickly, her voice strained. The place looked closed. The man didn't move, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Not closed, just quiet." Lauren tugged on Jenna's arm. "We should go," she whispered urgently. The man took a step closer, and Jenna felt her heart leap into her throat. "No need to rush off," he said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You've just got here." Without warning, the lights in the diner flickered back on, revealing the man's face. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were cold and predatory. Jenna's instincts screamed at her to run, but he was blocking the only exit. "Jenna!" Lauren's voice was filled with panic as she pulled her friend toward the counter, ducking behind it. The man lunged after them, his boots thudding heavily on the floor. They could hear him breathing heavily as he moved closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Jenna frantically searched for something to defend herself with, her hands shaking. She grabbed a heavy metal coffee pot, gripping it tightly. Lauren was trembling beside her, tears welling in her eyes. "We need to make a break for it," Jenna whispered, trying to stay calm. "When I hit him, you run for the door." Lauren nodded, though she looked terrified. The man's footsteps grew louder as he approached the counter. Jenna held her breath, waiting for the right moment. When he was close enough, she sprang up and swung the coffee pot with all her strength. It connected with a sickening thud, and the man stumbled back, cursing in pain. "Go!" Jenna shouted, pushing Lauren toward the door. Lauren bolted, but the man recovered quickly, grabbing Jenna's arm in a vice-like grip. She screamed, struggling to free herself as he twisted her arm painfully. Lauren hesitated in the door, torn between running and helping her friend. "Lauren, run!" Jenna screamed, her voice desperate. But before Lauren could move, the man yanked Jenna toward him, a knife glinting in his other hand. He slashed at her, but she managed to twist away, the blade only grazing her arm. Blood seeped through her sleeve, but she ignored the pain, focusing on getting free. Lauren, fueled by adrenaline, grabbed a glass bottle from the counter and hurled it at the man's head. It shattered on impact, causing him to stagger and loosen his grip on Jenna. Seizing the opportunity, Jenna kicked him hard in the knee, sending him crashing to the floor. "Come on," Jenna yelled, grabbing Lauren's hand and pulling her toward the exit. They burst through the door and sprinted to the car, Jenna fumbling with the keys in her panic. The man was already on his feet, stumbling out of the diner, blood dripping down his face. His eyes were wild with fury as he limped after them. Jenna finally managed to unlock the car, and they both scrambled inside. She slammed the door shut and started the engine, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The man was getting closer, his knife gleaming in the dim light. For a while, they drove in silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. But the sense of unease continued to grow, like a dark cloud hanging over them. The road seemed to go on forever, with no signs of civilization in sight, just miles and miles of desolate wilderness. As they rounded a bend, the headlights suddenly illuminated a sign that read, "Diner ahead, 2 miles." The sight of it filled them with a strange mix of hope and dread. A part of Anna wanted to stop, to take a break from the unnerving journey and collect themselves. But another part of her, the part that had been rattled by the encounter at the gas station, wanted to keep driving, to get as far away from the darkness as possible. "I don't know if we should stop," Anna said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much of a choice," Sarah replied, glancing at the fuel gauge. "We're running low on gas, and we don't know when we'll see another place to stop." "Maybe it's safer to just keep going," Emily suggested, her eyes wide with fear. "We don't know what's out there." But the decision was made for them as the car suddenly sputtered, the engine choking as it struggled to keep running. The needle on the fuel gauge dipped dangerously low, and Anna knew they didn't have a choice. She eased her foot off the gas and let the car coast toward the diner. The neon sign flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the small, rundown building. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of old, rusted trucks parked haphazardly near the entrance. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years, and the sight of it made Anna's stomach churn with anxiety. As they pulled into the lot, the engine finally died, leaving them in silence. The only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant hum of the neon lights. The air was thick with tension as they sat there, staring at the diner, unsure of what to do next. "We should go inside," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Maybe they have a phone we can use to call for help." Anna nodded, but a sense of dread gnawed at her. Something about the place felt off, like they were being lured into a trap. But they had no other options. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the stillness as they approached the entrance. The door creaked loudly as Anna pushed it open, and they were greeted by a musty smell that made them wrinkle their noses. The interior of the diner was dimly lit, with a few flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The place was empty, save for a lone figure seated at the counter, hunched over a cup of coffee. The man didn't look up as they entered, but Anna could feel his eyes on them, watching from beneath the brim of his worn-out hat. His presence sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to walk toward the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Is there a phone we can use? Our car broke down, and we need to call for help." The man slowly turned his head to look at her, and Anna felt her heart skip a beat. His face was gaunt and weathered, with deep lines etched into his skin. But it was his eyes that unnerved her the most, cold, empty, and devoid of any emotion. "Phone's in the back," he said in a raspy voice, jerking his thumb toward a door behind the counter. "But it don't work half the time." Anna nodded, her mouth dry as she glanced at Sarah and Emily. "Let's go check it out." They made their way to the back of the diner, where a payphone hung on the wall next to a door marked "Employees Only." The receiver was covered in dust and the cord was frayed, but Anna picked it up anyway and pressed it to her ear. There was nothing but static on the other end. "It's dead," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're stuck here." Panic began to set in, and the walls of the small diner seemed to close in around them. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and Anna felt like they were being suffocated by the oppressive atmosphere. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the diner, growing louder with each passing second. The man from the counter was approaching, and Anna's instincts screamed at her to run. But before she could react, the door behind them burst open, and a figure lunged at them from the darkness. Emily screamed as she was pulled back into the shadows, disappearing from sight. Anna and Sarah were frozen in shock, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But when the man from the counter stepped closer, they snapped out of their daze and bolted for the door. They burst out of the diner and into the night, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they sprinted toward the car. But their hope of escape was short-lived. The figure that had taken Emily emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. It was tall and lanky, with a face twisted in a grotesque mask of rage. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its mouth was twisted into a snarl. Anna's heart raced as she backed away, her mind screaming for a way out. But the figure was relentless, advancing on them with slow, deliberate steps. The man from the counter joined it, his cold eyes locked on them as he closed in. "Run!" Anna shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the car. They dashed for the vehicle, but the man was fast, too fast. He grabbed Sarah by the hair and yanked her back, throwing her to the ground with a sickening thud. Anna reached the car, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. She glanced back to see the man standing over Sarah, his foot pressing down on her chest. Sarah struggled, but he was too strong, pinning her to the ground with ease. "No!" Anna screamed, rushing forward in a desperate attempt to save her friend. But the figure from the shadows was already there, blocking her path once more. It let out a low, guttural growl, and Anna knew she was out of time. With a burst of adrenaline, she turned and ran into the night, away from the diner, away from the car, away from everything. The sounds of Sarah's screams and the man's mocking laughter echoed in her ears as she sprinted down the highway, her heart pounding in her chest. But she didn't get far. The figure was on her in an instant, its cold, bony hands wrapping around her throat and cutting off her air. Anna clawed at its grip, but it was no use. The world around her began to fade, and the last thing she saw before everything went black was the sinister smile of the man from the diner, watching her with those cold, empty eyes. When Anna regained consciousness, she found herself lying in the middle of the highway, the cold asphalt pressing against her cheek. Her body ached, and her throat burned from the figure's grip. She struggled to her feet, her vision blurry as she looked around. The diner was gone, as if it had never existed. The highway stretched out before her, empty and desolate, with no sign of Sarah, Emily, or the figures that had attacked them. The only sound was the wind, howling through the trees on either side of the road. Anna stumbled forward, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Had it all been a nightmare? Or was she still trapped in some twisted reality? She didn't know, and she didn't care. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, had to find a way out of this nightmare. As she walked down the empty highway, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness, stretching out endlessly behind her. But she knew they were out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for her. And she knew that no matter how far she ran, no matter how fast she moved, she would never truly escape. Because they were always watching, always waiting, always stalking, and they would never let her go. The story ends with a chilling sense of hopelessness as Anna realizes she may never truly escape the horrors that have pursued her. The night drive, the deserted diner, and the stalking figures all combine to create a suspenseful and terrifying tale that leaves a lasting impression. The Shadows of Briarwood. Briarwood, a small, unassuming town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, had always been a place where everyone knew everyone. Its cobblestone streets and old brick buildings gave it a quaint charm, a far cry from the horrors that would soon unfold. The Briarwood Killer, as he would come to be known, was a shadow in the night, a predator who preyed on lonely women. His lair, a decrepit cabin hidden deep within the woods, was a place of unspeakable terror. The cabin, once a hunting lodge abandoned for decades, was overgrown with ivy and surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the sun. The locals whispered about it, calling it the Devil's Den, but few had ever dared to venture near. Detective Evelyn Hart, a seasoned officer with the Briarwood Police Department, had seen her share of grisly crimes, but nothing had prepared her for the horrors that were about to unfold. With her sharp instincts and relentless determination, she had solved countless cases, earning the respect of her colleagues and the fear of criminals. Her assistant, Jake Collins, a young and eager officer fresh out of the academy, was eager to prove himself under her mentorship. The first body was discovered in the fall, just as the leaves began to change. A young woman, barely out of her 20s, was found in a shallow grave near the edge of the forest. Her face was contorted in fear, her body bruised and battered. The killer had left no clues, no evidence, just the lifeless body of his victim. Evelyn knew they were dealing with someone who was meticulous, someone who knew how to cover his tracks. The only thing they had to go on was the location of the body, close to the forest, near the Devil's Den. But even that was a dead end. The cabin was a ghost of a place, with no signs of recent habitation. As the days turned into weeks, more bodies were discovered, each one in a different part of the forest, but all within a few miles of the Devil's Den. The town was gripped by fear. Women were afraid to go out alone, and rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the killer was a ghost, others believed he was a demon, but Evelyn knew better. This was the work of a man who knew how to hide in the shadows. The first real break in the case came when a woman named Laura Thompson, a local waitress, narrowly escaped the killer's clutches. She had been walking home late one night when she felt someone watching her. She quickened her pace, but the footsteps behind her matched her speed. Just as she was about to run, a man stepped out of the shadows and grabbed her. She fought back with everything she had, kicking and screaming until she broke free and ran to the nearest house for help.
When Evelyn and Jake interviewed Laura, she described her attacker as a tall man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. His voice was cold and emotionless, and his grip was like iron. But the most chilling detail was the smell, a pungent, decaying odor that clung to him like a second skin. Evelyn knew they were dealing with someone who was deranged, someone who lived on the fringes of society. She and Jake scoured the town, looking for anyone who matched the description. But Briarwood was small, and everyone knew everyone. The killer had to be someone who kept to himself, someone who could blend into the background unnoticed. As they continued their investigation, they uncovered more stories of women who had narrowly escaped the killer. Sarah Miller, a school teacher, had been driving home late one night when she noticed a car following her. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but when the car started matching her every turn, she knew something was wrong. She sped up, but the car stayed on her tail, its headlights glaring in her rearview mirror. Panicking, she swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose the car, but it followed her. Just as she was about to give up hope, she saw a police car parked on the side of the road. She honked her horn and flashed her lights, and the car behind her suddenly turned off and sped away. Sarah's description of the car, a black sedan with tinted windows, matched the vehicle Laura had seen near the Devil's Den. Evelyn and Jake knew they were getting closer, but the killer was always one step ahead. The turning point in the investigation came when a local hunter reported seeing a man near the Devil's Den. The hunter had been out early in the morning tracking deer when he spotted a figure moving through the trees. The man was tall and thin, with a hood pulled over his head. The hunter didn't think much of it at first, but when he saw the man enter the old cabin, he knew something was wrong. He had heard the stories about the Devil's Den and decided to report it to the police. Evelyn and Jake immediately went to the cabin, but by the time they arrived, the killer was gone. Inside, they found a macabre scene: blood-stained walls, rusty chains, and the remains of a fire that had burned in the fireplace. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and Evelyn knew they were in the killer's lair. They found a journal hidden under a loose floorboard, filled with the killer's twisted thoughts. He wrote about his desire to cleanse the town of its sins, to rid it of women who he believed were impure. He described how he lured his victims to the cabin, using their loneliness and fear against them. He reveled in their terror, in the power he held over them as he took their lives.
Evelyn knew they had to act fast. The journal mentioned a final cleansing, and she feared the killer was planning something even more horrific. She and Jake set a trap, using a young female officer as bait. They sent her out late at night, walking alone near the Devil's Den, hoping to draw the killer out. The plan worked. The killer appeared, just as they had hoped, but he was smarter than they had anticipated. He spotted the police presence and fled into the woods, leading Evelyn and Jake on a frantic chase through the dark forest. The trees closed in around them, the night air thick with tension as they pursued him deeper into the shadows. Finally, they cornered him near an old, crumbling bridge. He stood at the edge, his gaunt face twisted into a sneer as he looked at them with hollow eyes. Evelyn stepped forward, her gun trained on him, but before she could react, he turned and jumped into the ravine below. They scrambled to the edge, expecting to see his broken body on the rocks, but there was nothing, just the rushing water below. For weeks, they searched the ravine and the surrounding forest, but the killer had vanished, leaving behind only the terror he had wrought on Briarwood. The town slowly returned to normal, but the fear lingered, a shadow that haunted the streets long after the killer was gone. It wasn't until months later that Evelyn received a package in the mail. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of the Devil's Den, with a figure standing in the doorway. It was the killer, his face still twisted into that same sneer, his eyes hollow and dead. On the back of the photograph was a single word: soon. The Briarwood killer was never caught, and the town remains haunted by his memory. His name, whispered in fear, was revealed at last in the journal they had found: Victor Hale. And though the cabin in the woods has since been burned to the ground, the fear that he will return continues to cast a long, dark shadow over Briarwood.